You know what, guys? Ever since I started making videos on this very YouTube channel, I've been given many different titles from many different parts of the internet. Some people think I'm an underground historian who really knows his facts. Other people think I'm an underground grifter who only talks about these topics because they make me money. I've been called a trend hopper, a culture vulture, a straight up asshole, and while none of those titles really bother me, there is one that I've never really agreed with. Because many people online have branded me as the underground channel who tries to cancel people for better and for worse, with many people liking that type of content and wanting me to destroy more people's careers, and other people very much hating me and thinking that I'm destroying the type of music that they know and love. But let me tell you guys, I'm going to peel back the curtain one final time and reveal why I really make these videos. And it mostly comes down to the fact that I make videos on what I'm interested in. Sometimes that might be a crazy controversy that an artist got into, and other times it might just be about their life. I don't pick the hyperfixation picks me. But more than anything, I'm interested in weird characters. I'm interested in people who have crazy lives unlike anything I've ever seen in my own life. But let me tell you, if that's what I've been looking for all along, I've definitely been looking in the wrong part of the underground. Because while people like Fat Nick or Young Goth might have their own weird quirks and definitely are interesting people, but if I really want the weirdest of the weird, the worst of the worst, then well, I gotta look in the newer underground with the more modern day guys because they're really doing a lot of weird and out of pocket stuff right now. Like currently, as I'm recording this video, they're probably doing some weird shit. But among the many weird and odd people in the modern day underground, there is one artist who stands above the rest. Somebody who's already had a boatload of controversies, countless rumors made about him, mugshots, violence, attempted murder, and much, much more. And all of that at only the age of 19. Yeah, that's right. We're talking about the modern day XXXTentacion, an artist that many of you may know and probably don't love, but are at least fascinated in, going by the name of Jaydes. Yes, that's right. By popular demand, we're finally going to be talking about the underground maniac himself, Jaydes. And unlike many other people who have touched on this topic, I'm not going to be mostly focusing on the crimes that he committed or mostly focusing on the music. I'm going to be focusing on all of it, truly putting together the picture of who he is and how he got to where he is now. So if you're interested and want to hear more, hit that like button and stay tuned. We will now be talking about the story of Jaydes. And yes, before I say anything, I am sick. I'm sorry that I sound a little bit weird in this video, but anyways, let's get into it. Jayden Yen Dumont was born February 24th, 2006 in Broward County, Florida, to a Dominican mother and a Haitian father, as the youngest of three siblings with two older sisters. Now, at the time that Jayden was born, the family was actually living in a city known as Pompano Beach, which is a pretty rough place to grow up, actually being the very same neighborhood and city that Kodak Black came from, although they wouldn't spend very long there, later relocating to Tamarack, which apparently is a much better city, although they would be in the hood at the time. However, before Jayden ended up hitting the age of 5, they would end up relocating to the suburbs, and after that, things would get a lot better for the entire family. And just by taking a look at his upbringing, it really wasn't all that out of the ordinary. Both of his parents had pretty solid full-time jobs, were bringing in a full-time income, they were comfortably middle class, and on top of that, both of his parents are creative people, with his father actually attempting to be an R&B singer before Jayden was born and making it pretty far, although unfortunately there isn't really a whole lot of information about the music that he dropped or how exactly well it did. But hey, even getting signed to a major label, especially back in the 90s, is much farther than most people get, so you gotta give him props for that. And on top of that, Jayden's mother was also a pretty creative person, actually being a ballerina dancer who did a bunch of shows in New York, so both of them definitely had that creative spark within their blood. And of course, with them both being very, once again, I know I said it too many times, creative people, they would want the same for their own children, encouraging Jayden to take piano lessons at the age of 3, with him becoming very talented at playing the instrument by the time that he was 7 years old, as well as putting him in both soccer and karate lessons, with him quickly becoming very talented at playing soccer, playing on both his elementary, middle, and even high school teams, and at one point getting so good that he was actually being scouted out by the Olympics, so he definitely had a very innate talent from an early age. And on top of that, he had a pretty diverse amount of musical influences, with his father introducing him to Jodeci when he was only 5 years old, and his older older sisters introducing him to a lot more rock and punk acts like Pierce the Veil, Falling in Reverse, and even Gigi Allen, who would quickly become one of Jaden's biggest influences, which is a little bit disturbing when you really think about the type of guy that Gigi Allen was, but hey, music is music, and whatever spoke to him, spoke to him. And on top of introducing him to all those different types of music, his older sisters would also show him a lot of footage of Warped Tour with many different bands playing to absolutely crazy audiences, which would inspire him at a very early age to want to do the same. He wanted to make his own music, and because of that, he would start to learn how to play guitar around the age of 8. So from an outside perspective, his childhood seemed very normal. I mean, he was from a middle-class family with very supportive parents, and you would think that because of that, he would have done well in school as well, but that's far from the truth. As soon as he got into kindergarten, he would immediately start getting into fights, as even from a young age, he would always dress and act very differently from all of his peers, and because of that, he was usually singled out and often bullied. But let me tell you, Jaden was not the type of kid who was going to take that laying down, and he would often get into fights and beat the fuck out of kids every time that they tried to fuck with him, which would eventually lead him to getting kicked out of school on 2 different occasions. The first time was because a girl was trying to make fun of his clothes, so he ripped out her braid and wore it as a keychain, which is pretty deranged behavior, but I guess he was a young kid, so nothing all that weird yet. And the second time would take place when a kid who he thought was gay would try to play footsies with him under the table, so he ended up chokeslamming him into a desk, which probably wasn't as warranted, but hey, he was definitely playing into that X energy, right? But it seems like the school didn't really feel the same way, and he would end up getting suspended once again, which would lead his parents to take him to a doctor to try to see if he had some sort of mental issue, with the doctor diagnosing him with bipolar around the age of 8, I think. He never really was specific, but it definitely happened a little bit later on in life. And once you really start to dive into his musical catalog, you can definitely tell that he has bipolar, as he's always switching his persona, he's always making different types of music. He never is really able to stay on one topic for very long. He goes from happy to sad, basically all of the normal signs of, well, bipolarism. However, all of what I just said comes from the horse's mouth, as he's talked about his childhood quite a bit during interviews, as he's only 19 years old right now, so that's basically all he can talk about. He hasn't really lived an adult life yet. But there definitely are some more troubling accounts of his childhood coming from an unconfirmed source of somebody claiming to be his cousin. Now, take this all with a grain of salt, because the person who was claiming to be his cousin was actually revealing all this information through a page whose sole reason for existing was to expose Jaydes, so you can't really take this as absolute truth, but that cousin would claim that they would often play with Jaydes when he was younger, and apparently on one of these playdates, he actually ended up killing a crow and playing with its guts. And honestly, when it comes to the second part of that statement, I'm not all that weirded out. I mean, many young boys like to play with dead things. I mean, when I was younger, I would poke dead squirrels with a stick, but I never like pulled the guts out and rubbed it on my face or anything weird like that, which is what was assumed to be happening here. Although I will say that killing animals is definitely pretty troubling behavior, as it's often an early warning sign of somebody who's going to grow up to have violent intentions later on in life, or maybe even become a murderer. The 3 biggest signs are usually wetting the bed to a very late age, having blunt force trauma to their head from a young age, and killing animals. Although I wouldn't really say just killing animals proves that you're going to be a violent person later on, as unfortunately when kids grow up in boring neighborhoods, they often find a way to make their own fun, and I've heard many stories of people putting buckets on cats or killing squirrels. I think it's pretty gross, I think it's pretty fucked up, but I'm just saying that you can't really diagnose Jaydes as a serial killer because he killed a single crow, if it even happened. It's also semi-impressive that he was able to kill a crow because they fly. I don't know how he did that, but anyways, let's move on from that and continue to talk about how he eventually got into music. As right around the time that he turned 11 years old, he would discover the SoundCloud app, with the first artist on there that really caught his attention actually being Lucky, which really isn't all that surprising when you listen to the type of music that Lucky was making at the time and the type of music that Jaydes would go on to make later on in life. But it wouldn't be very long before he started to branch out from Lucky, discovering Playboi Carti through the collaboration songs that they made together, before then discovering Black Crate, and eventually the most influential artist of his entire life, XXXTentacion. on. Because not only did X come from the very same county as Jaydes, not only was he making a bunch of noise with barely any label backing at the time, but he was also a pretty mentally ill, aggressive kid who had a lot of issues that he was putting out into his music. So for somebody like Jaydes, who also had a lot of mental issues, it really spoke to him. And this would inspire him to start making his own rap music around the age of 13 after discovering Audacity on the family computer and buying a blue snowball mic to record his vocals, which definitely isn't the best mic when it comes to trying to make music, but considering the fact that both X, Ski, and multiple other SoundCloud rappers got their start on the blue snowball, it wasn't really all that out of the ordinary to use that type of mic at the time, as after all, it was cheap and it had pretty good quality for what it was. Now, according to Jaydes himself, he actually began to make music in 2019, although considering the fact that he's had over 15 different Spotify's and SoundCloud accounts, it's very hard to track down his music in general, and it seems like he ended up deleting all of his music prior to 2020, as it probably wasn't very good. And if you try to look on Genius for what his very first track is, it will tell you that it was actually Metabolism, which he dropped all the way back in motherfucking 1915. Damn, man, I didn't know Jaydes was the very first rapper ever. We gotta put respect on his name for that one. But no, for real, obviously he didn't drop his first track in 1915, and not only that, but Metabolism is definitely not the first track that he ever dropped, so Genius isn't really gonna help us out all that much here, so we're gonna have to do it ourselves. By looking at old SoundCloud uploads, trying to see if he has any burner YouTube accounts that might have a couple music videos or old audio files on them, and by doing that, you can find a couple different tracks that are actually listed as 2019, with the biggest one being Mood Swings, but by immediately looking into the comment section, you'll see people saying that he actually dropped that song in 2020. And I'm sorry, but I'm not going to believe random YouTube uploads that don't have any actual information of why they think he dropped in 2019, so we're going to start with the actual confirmable stuff. If I get anything wrong here, my bad, this was pretty hard to put together, but from what I can tell, the first still publicly available track online from Jaydes dropped on August 14th of 2020, which was called Chrome Hearts. Now, when he first began to make music, he was actually going under the alias of Saint, although it seems like he wouldn't keep that name for very long, as by the time that he dropped his second track, he had already switched it over to Evils, which apparently was inspired by G.G. Allin first of all, but also many of the punk and rock bands that he was listening to at the time, with Evils actually being spelt wrong, which really isn't anything all that unique when it comes to hip hop, and the actual name Evil coming from the fact that I guess he thought he was evil. I mean, he was an edgy 14-year-old, it's probably best to not look all that deep into it, but yeah, he's evil, guys. Or some may say, actually evil. Check out the boy, he makes amazing YouTube videos, one of my favorite hip hop commentary channels on the entire platform, so go over there and subscribe to him. But before you do that, let's talk about how Evil's musical career began to evolve. Now, his very first track was very hyperpop inspired, which makes a lot of sense considering the fact that he was a big fan of Lucky, and also that that genre of music was absolutely massive during the pandemic. This was right before the entire rage explosion in 2021, where every single rapper, both new and old, would start to make rage music. People were starting to go towards that sound, but they didn't really have a name for it yet. So I would call this somewhere between hyperpop, plug, and a little bit of rage. I don't know, guys. Musical genres don't really mean anything anymore because people mix so many different sounds together, making completely unique things, and then people call things that aren't hyperpop, hyperpop. So whatever, who really gives a fuck? He made music that kind of sounds like Playboi Carti. And after dropping a couple tracks on SoundCloud, he would immediately start to put himself out there by going to open mics and talent shows all over the city in hopes of gaining a local audience. Although, considering the fact that the pandemic was about to hit in 2020, he didn't have very long to do that and would instead have to find his audience online. Which was probably for the best considering the fact that people never really fuck with you in your home city until you start to blow up online, and considering the fact that apparently Jaydes was very shy at the time, although I don't fully believe that because a shy kid wouldn't get up on stage at a talent show and rap some random bullshit that he made in his bedroom, so he probably had a lot of confidence before the pandemic, but like many other kids his age, once he ended up getting locked down for multiple months to years, not going to school and not getting any sort of socialization with other kids, he became very antisocial and a little bit shy. But hey, it was the perfect time to start dropping music, and he would immediately capitalize on that by dropping a track in November called Jug, before then dropping another one in December called 27, featuring another underground artist named Rio Boss. Now, naturally, you would think that the two of them would have met online, as after all, nobody was really going outside or doing a whole lot of in real life musical stuff at the time, but apparently the two of them actually met through a mutual friend in the area, and Jaydes would invite him over to record music because he had no idea how to use FL Studio and he needed somebody to help him out. No shame in that, Jaydes. I still have no idea how to use that shit. It seems very complicated, but the two of them figured it out and ended up putting out their track 27 on both SoundCloud and Spotify. Soon after those couple tracks dropped, he would go on to create his first alternative persona, not a name change, but an entirely different Spotify page going by the name of Heart Kimmy. Apparently, this is where he would put his more positive music that was upbeat and got people going, whereas Evils is where he would put his more downtrodden, depressing, and pretty well anything that he wanted to at the time, although it seems like he would abandon the Heart Kimmy Spotify page pretty quickly after creating it, as the reason that he made it in the first place was that he didn't want to be boxed into one genre of music and felt like people would get upset if he was constantly switching it up, so he would create different personas to make different styles of music. Although, to be honest with you, the music that he made on Heart Kimmy and the music that he made on Evil sounds very similar to me, but maybe I don't have a lot of experience with this type of music, so my ear isn't really trained enough to hear all the similarities and all the differences. But anyways, with the creation of those two Spotify's, 2020 would come to an end and 2021 would begin, with him dropping his first real notable track on February 27th of 2021 called PayPal, which was once again in that more plug and be style and was a little bit more chaotic than his previous music. Now, personally, I don't like this song at all, mostly due to the fact that it's not really my type of music, but it seems like he was hitting the right audience at the right time because this track would immediately start to do numbers on SoundCloud, gaining 100,000 streams in only a couple months, with him immediately capitalizing on all of that buzz by dropping a follow-up called High School. Now, this was actually the first ever track that Jaydes would drop that got attention on the wider internet. I'm not really sure how well it did. Some people said that it got like 400,000 plays on Spotify. Some people say that it was closer to 100,000, but either way, it ended up getting him more attention than he had ever gotten before. And it would also get him noticed by a very prominent underground artist going by the name of Pasto Flaco, who would get him connected to a pretty big mainstream artist going by the name of Little Tecca, who would ask him to join his upcoming rap collective, which was known as First Class Angels. Now, nowadays, this collective is no longer active, and it never really got all that big in name alone, although many of the artists who were part of it would go on to become pretty prominent in the modern underground scene, with the most prominent being Baby Santana, which is really funny that he ended up joining Little Tecca's group because he really looks like he's related to Little Tecca, and Young Fazo, who, while is clowned on quite a bit in the modern day, is a pretty prominent underground artist in his own right. Now, I believe that Jaydes ended up joining this group around the summer of 2021, as he would tell a story about flying out to New York with his mom to meet up with Little Tecca. The reason that he had to bring his mom is because, well, he was 15 years old and he couldn't get a hotel room or even book a flight. It's kind of funny because before this point, he wouldn't even tell his parents that he was making music, but then all of a sudden he comes to his mom and says, "Hey, I'm making music and also I need to go to New York to meet up with a mainstream rapper. Do you think that you could take me?" And she was like, "Hell yeah." So honestly, pretty cool mom. Now, for whatever reason, he never really ended up making all that much music with the group themselves. They ended up putting out two different mixtapes, and from what I can tell, he doesn't appear on either one, so he was probably kicked out of the group pretty soon after he joined it, although he was dropping a lot of music on his own. On May 30th of 2021, he would end up dropping a track called Offensive, before then dropping two tracks in the month of June called Do Too Much and Trust Issues, then taking a month off in July before coming back in August to drop a track called Where You At, which were all solo singles in different styles and genres, before then following that up in September with a track called Melatonin featuring Young Fazo. Now, Young Fazo was the only prominent member of First Class Angels that he ever really worked with, and the reason for that is because he would actually get kicked out of the group for, apparently in his own words, sending memes to the group chat when they were trying to have a serious conversation. Now, many people don't really believe this entire story because it seems a little bit crazy to kick a member out of your rap collective because they're simply sending memes. However, when Jaydes ended up talking about this entire incident on one of his interviews, a couple people in the comment section would say that they remembered the initial incident and that at the time, he actually went on Instagram Live to talk about it. And during that period of time, he would tell a slightly different line of events, with him saying the real reason that he got kicked out of the group chat is because he was actually sending gay corn while people were trying to have a serious conversation, which makes a lot more sense, as I would understand why Little Tekka would be pretty pissed off about that. You're trying to talk about royalty splits or whatever, and somebody's like, hey, look at this gay corn. But hey, at least it wasn't baby corn, right? I mean, Jaydes wouldn't do something like that, right? Oh, don't worry, we'll get to that. But anyway, soon after getting kicked out of the group, he would abandon the Evil's name, now taking on the moniker that we know him by, Jaydes, and dropping a track called Vivian, which actually ended up doing pretty well on Spotify, gaining him a lot of attention in the wider underground scene, with him still only being 15 years old at the time, so pretty impressive. After that, in December, he ended up creating another Spotify account, which was called Entry Log, which was basically this evolving album where he would drop a new song on it whenever he was feeling something that he didn't really know how to put into words, but was able to put into music. And you would think a side project like this wouldn't really do all that well, but surprisingly, many of Jaydes' fans would discover the Spotify, and a couple different entries, 4 in particular, would get a lot of attention. But I wouldn't call this project an actual mixtape. It's more like a bunch of different disjointed tracks all put together into one kind of compilation album, whereas his actual first mixtape would drop on December 31st of 2021, which was called exclamation mark question mark, which was obviously heavily inspired by XXXTentacion's project question mark and Trippie Redd's tribute album to X exclamation mark, although the music on it didn't really sound anything like X or Trippie, once again being more of that plug and be style. But it seems like fans were really loving that type of sound, so there was no reason to really change it up. And this project also had another feature from Young Fazo on the track Passive Aggressive, which would go on to become one of his biggest songs at the time, only to immediately be overshadowed the very next year when he ended up dropping a track called Slugs, which went on to become a massive hit on Spotify, gaining 4 million streams. And this is really where you would start to see a bunch of YouTubers make videos about him, talking about this underground cult figure who was gaining millions of streams from his bedroom, which once again wasn't all that unique for the time, but Jaydes was definitely standing out from the pack. And it was during this year in 2022 when he would do his first couple interviews, really giving his fans an introduction to who he was as a person and how exactly he got to where he is now. Although unfortunately, all of this online attention would start to leak into his real life, and with him returning to actual in real life classes in 2022, he would start to realize that he was getting way too much attention from his fellow classmates who were doing a lot of really weird shit, like taking pictures of him when he was in the bathroom and coming up to him and asking to make music, which he definitely didn't want to do. It was also around this time that he decided that he no longer wanted to play soccer, feeling like he didn't really have any love for the sport and was only playing it because his parents were putting pressure on him to excel in the sport as well as school. But since he wasn't doing well in school, soccer was basically his meal ticket. But now that he had music, he didn't need it anymore, and he would end up dropping out of school at the age of 16 and taking online classes, although it's not really confirmed if he ever ended up finishing those or if he ended up dropping out altogether at the age of 17. And of course, like any parent who actually gives a fuck about their kids, his mom and dad weren't very happy about him deciding to drop out of school to make a bunch of bullshit music in his room. I mean, he definitely had some solid numbers at the time, but they probably didn't think there was much longevity in that type of career path. And this would cause a lot of friction between him and his parents, which would really start to be shown in the music that he was making at the time. He would end up dropping a pretty small mixtape called Romanticism, which was very much beloved by his fan base, before then dropping a full-on album called Heart Pacing, which many fans didn't really like, as apparently it was more of a mainstream sound than what they were used to, although by listening to it, it doesn't really sound mainstream to me, but hey, what do I know? But even though he was getting quite a bit of pushback from his actual core audience, the project would still do pretty well on Spotify, with one of the tracks in particular called Who Can You Trust featuring Rich Amiri doing, well, very well, because that's a pretty big cosign in the underground scene. Soon after that, on September 21st, he would drop a track called South, which would go on to blow up massively on TikTok, gaining him millions and millions of streams. After that, he would drop another small project called Sativa, which he didn't really promote in any way and was only 3 songs long, meaning that it didn't really make a very big drop in the bucket when it came to his wider career, although his fans definitely liked it, seeing it as kind of a return to form. Soon after that, he would create his first ever collective known as Goth Angels, which is undoubtedly inspired by Black Cray, which included him and another very infamous underground rapper going by the name of Wi-Fi Skeleton, although most people online know him more by his YouTube name, which was Cyrus, as back in the days of 2018 to around 2020, he was actually a commentary YouTuber, similar to Leafy is Here. And while his channel wasn't really anything all that special, basically being gameplay and talking about a bunch of random internet bullshit, which I guess is what I'm doing right here, however, his channel probably would have never really been remembered in the grand scheme of YouTube if it wasn't for the fact that he would catch a bunch of bad allegations right around 2019 for apparently hooking up with underage girls, although I don't really want to get too into that in this video because if I start to talk about Wi-Fi Skeleton, we're going to be talking for another 40 minutes and I want to keep this focused on Jaydes. All you need to know is that he had a destroyed reputation, so he began to make music under different aliases connected with Jaydes, and at the time that all of this was going down, nobody was really aware that Wi-Fi Skeleton was the same person as Cyrus, although it would come out in 2024 and 2025. It was also around this very same time that he would create another persona going by the name of Mandy, which is where he would put his more aggressive punk-inspired music, and he would also go on to create another collective known as Mandy's Skeleton, which was meant to be more of a band than an actual rap act. It was meant to be him and Wi-Fi Skeleton making rock music, and they had plans of getting big enough to go to Warped Tour, although unfortunately, due to a series of pretty unavoidable events, the two of them would never end up reaching that dream. And with the creation of that group, 2022 would come to an end and 2023 would begin, which in my opinion was probably the biggest year that he ever had when it came to his actual music, as he would go on to get an absolutely massive cosign from Osama-san on the track Balenci Thought. Now, if you're not aware of who Osama-san is, he's basically one of the biggest modern day underground rappers, basically on the level of Netspend, although he has a lot more respect within the actual underground scene, whereas Netspend has kind of sold out and went mainstream. I know a lot of this shit is very confusing, but all you really need to know is that he's a big rapper within that space, and he would get Jaydes a lot of attention that he never had before. Taking him from being one of those niche underground artists who was kinda if you know type of people to an actual bona fide underground superstar, which he would immediately capitalize on by dropping his first official album, or second album, I'm not really sure, but this is really the one that everybody talks about when it comes to music from Jaydes, which was called Ghetto, Cupid, Soldier. And honestly, despite the fact that once again it's not really my type of music, this is a very impressive project, as he actually produced every single track on it, and every single track is from a different genre. I guess you could say it was kinda like Camp Crystal Lake, although Jaydes' fanbase definitely enjoyed it a lot more than Sos Mulas did, probably due to the fact that he's a lot newer of an artist and his fan base is a lot more comfortable with him experimenting. And you could see just how much people enjoyed it because one of the tracks off of the project called Rose would go on to blow up on TikTok bigger than any track that he ever had before, and even to this day, Rose is one of his most popular songs, with people who have never heard of Jaydes before actually hearing the track on TikTok. So he was really starting to break through at this point. But unfortunately, this would pretty well be the peak of his entire career, as after this, things would really start to go downhill fast, as there was actually a rumor that would pop up online that Jaydes was trying to hook up with pretty young girls. Now, at the time, you got to keep in mind that he was 17 years old, although apparently the girls that he was trying to get with were 14. I mean, honestly, that's not all that weird of an age gap. I mean, it kind of depends on what your standards are, but most people wouldn't really look at that as all that weird. Although the weird part about it is that Jaydes actually ended up lying about his age and saying that he was 16 years old. And I'm not really sure why he did that because I don't really get what the difference between 16 and 17 is when you're talking to a 14-year-old. But either way, I guess one of them would end up hooking up with him and the other one wasn't really feeling him, so she would put out the screenshots and try to expose him for being a weirdo. Although it never really went anywhere, as after all, once again, they're both under the age of 18, the gap isn't really all that far apart, and one of the girls would even come out and say, I wasn't actually 14, I lied about my age, I'm actually 16.
Oh, so I'm 16, but he tried to say I'm 14 to make it dramatic or like to try to get clout or whatever.
So honestly, I don't don't really find this situation all that bad, and it seems like his fan base mostly agreed, turning this entire situation into a meme, commenting on almost every single TikTok that would use audio from him saying, Jade, she was 14, which I guess to his fan base would be funny, although it's kind of an inside joke that you're spreading all over the internet, which probably did hurt him in the long run. I'm sure there was at least one TikToker who ended up using audio from him, saw all the comments, and completely freaked out and took it down. And on top of that controversy, he would actually get in some legal trouble after police caught him with weed and Xanax, which I think weed is legal in Florida, but he was underage, so he would get in quite a bit of trouble. But lucky for him, his parents had a lot of money, they were able to hire a pretty good lawyer, and he would get out without much trouble. Although, for whatever reason, he would end up getting emancipated from his parents around the age of 17 and moving out to get his own apartment. I'm not really sure what the reason behind this was. Maybe it was because they were fighting all the time. I mean, they definitely weren't very happy with him dropping out of school, but overall, it seemed like they were very supportive and often tried to help him whenever he got into legal troubles. So you would think that they still had a good connection, but for whatever reason, he ended up getting his own apartment and completely disconnecting himself from his parents, which is a pretty risky move to make, although luckily for him, it would kind of pay off because 2024 would become one of his biggest and unfortunately in the later half, worst years of all time, but in the first half of it, things were going pretty well. As in April of that year, he would go on to drop a project called Bipolar, which was much different than his previous music, being a lot more rock influenced. And honestly, I would say out of any of the projects that I listened to for this video, I would say that this one was probably my favorite. I mean, the vocals are a little bit fucked up and it kind of sounds a little bit offbeat, but I do like the instrumentals and of course the rock influence is pretty good. Also, I just want to mention that while I was doing research for this video, the album cover for Bipolar on Genius would end up getting switched over to a mugshot of Charlie Kirk. I feel like I'm being personally fucked with, but hey, I mentioned it, so if you changed that because you wanted me to mention it, here you go. It's weird. Soon after that, he would appear on the Mascarilla podcast alongside Wi-Fi Skeleton, where he would mostly stay completely quiet, smoking cigarettes and saying a total of maybe 10 words the entire time. I guess the kids would call that aura farming, but to me, he kind of looked like he was possessed. He didn't move the entire time, and he might have even been asleep, considering the fact that he had a hat over his eyes the entire time. But anyways, we're not here to talk about him, we're here to talk about Jaydes. As it was actually in this interview where he would talk a little bit about his previous run-in with the law, saying that he was trying to keep out of trouble and that constant legal issues would completely tear down his career, so he wasn't really going to be doing anything that would get him into shit in the future, which is pretty ironic when you know what would happen in late 2024, but I digress. Also, during the entire interview, you can definitely tell that he's trying to talk in the mannerisms of XXXTentacion, doing that whole slow, introspective, overly detailed, doing the best that I can with what I have type of tone.
Damn near, yo. It's rough out there. Some niggas will really do that shit for a Balenciaga belt, bro. Like, niggas will really, like, rob your shit, kill your shit out there. I don't know. I listen to a lot of music, and I felt like I had to get a lot off my chest.
I know he said he was inspired by XXXTentacion, but people who straight up try to copy his mysterious persona and even copy his words are kind of corny. But I mean, at the time that he did the interview, he was only 18 years old, so I guess you can't really blame him. Soon after that, he would drop his next project called Count Up Dracula, which included a pretty disturbing track called Junkie, where he would go into detail about how he wanted to kill and eat a person and drink their blood. Kind of edgy shit, but in retrospect, once again, it may have been a sign. And in fact, even before that, on the album Bipolar, he actually had a track called Disassembled Girl, where he was, of course, talking about disassembling a girl. Once again, pretty creepy. But I mean, music is music and music is art. A lot of people like to really over-exaggerate what they're really feeling to give a certain type of mood. It's not like he was actively pretending to kill people, except for the fact that he ended up putting out a music video for Junkie, where he would actually act out tying up and killing a girl, so once again the signs were definitely there. Soon after that, on Halloween night of 2024, he would go on to drop a project called Panic, which would be his final body of music that he released before once again running into legal problems, although this time it wouldn't be for something simple like Xanax or weed. Instead, it was something a lot more violent. Now, nobody would really be aware of what happened until November 4th of 2024, when an Instagram page called Exposing Jaydes would come out with a story saying that he was actually on the run from police with a warrant out for his arrest for attempted murder. Now, this page had already been around for quite a while before this point, making some pretty crazy claims about Jaydes, including that aforementioned bird story, which once again can't really be confirmed if that was his cousin or not. However, this time it seems like they actually had proof with real police records from Florida claiming that he was on the run for attempted murder, and nobody really knew the reason why, although we would get more information on it not long after that. Now, the story that I'm about to tell you mostly comes from his arrest report as well as different court documents that we would get later down the road, but of course, this story has never been fully confirmed because the entire case never ended up going to trial. So really, it's one person's word against another, and while I definitely do believe that he carried out the acts described on November 2nd, I'm not here to try to prove it one way or another. I'm simply going to tell you the story the way that it was described, so here we go. So on November 2nd, Jaydes would end up inviting one of his ex-girlfriends over to his apartment to apparently hook up. Although she wasn't really feeling it, she would reject his advances, and he would become pretty upset about it. With him apparently returning to the room with a pink box cutter and a pair of scissors, and for a while it seems like nobody was all that freaked out, as we actually have a couple pictures from the scene of the crime where he can be seen sitting on her lap with the pink box cutter in his hand, so obviously, initially, she wasn't all that upset. However, it seems like things would take a turn for the worse in the following hour, because he would end up cutting her on the neck, face, and arms, leading her to have to flee into the bathroom, calling the police, and as soon as he heard her calling the cops, he would immediately escape the apartment and try to escape. After that, he would spend an entire 7 days on the run, with the entire world finding out about what he did about 3 days in, with many fans driving around the Broward area in hopes of running into him, which surprisingly they would time and time again. A couple different people recorded him sitting by a gas station and actually had a brief conversation with him, as well as another video surfacing online of him walking down the side of the highway looking very disheveled and out of it on some sort of drug. Now, like I said before, this would go on for about 7 days with the police trying to apprehend him and him being on the run, although it doesn't really seem like anybody was trying all that hard to pick him up, as after all, like I said, he was simply wandering around random neighborhoods under the influence, so it probably would have been pretty easy to spot him if somebody actually gave a fuck. But luckily for the police, this would all come to an end on November 10th when a Denny's employee would make a call to the police station saying that a violent man had come into the restaurant and was threatening people with a knife. Not the same knife that he used on the girl, but a different knife that he took from a table. The cops would then arrive to the scene. They would tell Jaydes to stand down. He wouldn't do so, so they beat the absolute fuck out of him and ended up placing him under arrest. Now, during the time that this all went down, we didn't really have a whole lot of information about the actual arrest. We would see the mugshot later on when he got processed at the police station, where he looked like he was in pretty bad shape, but we didn't really know why. However, very recently, the police ended up putting out the body cam footage where you can see them going into his bag and finding a crack pipe as well as a dead cat, which is pretty disturbing. I don't know where he got that, but yeah, the bird story kind of has a little bit more credence now that we've seen this on camera, although I can't show it. But before we get into his whole booking and trial and what went down after this point, I think it's important to try to dispel a couple rumors that would pop up around the time with the Exposing Jaydes page putting out a bunch of different crazy claims. The first and most believable one is when his ex actually ended up putting out a couple DMs between her and him where he would talk about wanting to drink blood and how he had actually drank blood before. I don't really think it proves much, but definitely shows that he was in a very bad mental state at different parts of his life. On top of that, they would also spread a rumor around that he supposedly murdered somebody in the past, which I simply don't believe. I mean, Jaydes is not some sort of master serial killer who knows how to get away with a crime. He ended up stabbing one person in the neck and was immediately apprehended. The dude is on drugs, he's mentally ill, he's completely fucked in the brain, he's not Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy. Another rumor that would pop up from this Instagram page is that he actually ended up putting pentagrams on his wall, which were made out of his own feces, which would of course immediately become a meme with many people drawing art of him putting poop pentagrams on the wall. However, some of his friends would come out and say that this was kind of a miscommunication. He would draw pentagrams on the walls of his apartment, but they weren't made out of poop. The reason that people confuse that is because he actually had a pet cat who he basically let use the bathroom wherever it wanted. So there you go. I don't really know if this is the most important thing to debunk right now when he's on the hook for attempted murder, but yeah, there you go. But anyways, upon getting booked at the police station, his legal team would immediately go to work to try to discredit the victim in any way that they could, with them basically implying that she planned this entire thing to try to get him in trouble. She was actually the one who ended up cutting herself up, which is pretty crazy. I mean, I know people harm themselves, but I don't think you would want to cut yourself on the neck with a box cutter because, well, that could kill you instantly if you hit the wrong spot. Their proof of her doing this comes from a bunch of different pictures they found on Instagram of her self-harming, which in my opinion doesn't really prove much. I mean, yeah, she was probably kind of mentally ill, so was Jaydes. I mean, it's not really surprising that two kind of troubled kids would come together and, be troubled at the same time. But I mean, honestly, when you're trying to defend somebody in Jaydes' situation, it's probably pretty hard to come up with a defense. So the whole she's crazy and set him up thing is probably the best that they could have came up with. But it seems like the lawyer that he had was really good at his job because he was immediately able to plead the sentence down from attempted murder to assault with a deadly weapon, which is still a pretty major crime and won't look good on your record, but it has a lot lighter of a sentence than, well, attempted murder. However, Jaydes was definitely not doing him any favors with him skipping out on a court appearance and writing down the reason why as rejected, basically saying that he didn't want to go. And because he ended up skipping out on court, he could have been held in contempt and denied bond, but it seems like his lawyer was once again really good at what he was doing because he was able to get his bond set at only $10,000, which is pretty well unheard of when it comes to a crime that bad. But of course, there was a couple restrictions, meaning that he would have to be on house arrest and had to move back in with his parents as he needed a permanent residency. And considering the fact that his apartment was now a crime scene, he definitely couldn't go back there. On top of that, he also had to undergo mandatory mental screenings and would have to get mental health help later on. But honestly, in the grand scheme of things, not really all that bad. And on December 22nd of 2024, he would plead non-guilty and be released on house arrest for the foreseeable future, with him of course having to return when it was time to go to court, but being able to have at least a little bit of freedom while he waited for the very slow legal system to work. But of course, Jaydes being Jaydes, he couldn't keep out of trouble and would immediately hop in a Discord call where he would openly talk about the case that was currently ongoing, basically saying that the girl was when they met up and that she set up the entire thing.
The full story is, bro, just don't fuck with a bitch. She came to my crib herself, bro, and she got manic and she had an episode and she grabbed the motherfucking box cutters and started stepping herself up, bro. And like I was like, what the fuck? So I'm fighting that shit out her hand. And then she ran to the bathroom and called the cops on me, bro. That's really it.
Kind of contradicting the story that the lawyer told. In his story, he said that the girl gave him an ultimatum, whereas in the lawyer's story, they said that she already had it planned out and was going to do it either way, with many fans pointing out that his story didn't really line up. On top of that, he would also talk about the mugshot, saying that he was in an alley smoking crack and then the police randomly jumped him.
Fucking Denny's, bro. That shit cursed.
What'd you get from Denny's? The people want to know.
Nigga should have went to Waffle House.
Yeah, Waffle House never snitch.
Oh
It was
God,
like some
Waffle House would have
waffles and
started joining in.
And
Yo, they want to hear about your mugshot, bro. You trying to tell the niggas a story?
oh, facts, bro. So I was doing some crack in a motherfucking alley, and I got picked up by feds, right? And it was like 6 or 7 of them during my intake that had grabbed me up, and he kind of grabbed me wrong, so I punched bro in his shit, and 7 of them niggas start punching, kicking me down, bro. It's fucking crazy. They jumped my ass.
Although that's completely untrue, seeing as how he was actually in the Denny's when he got jumped and he wasn't smoking crack, as at the time that they arrested him, he actually tested negative for any sort of drug use, which is kind of surprising when you consider that they found a crack pipe in his bag, but he probably smoked all of that on the very first day and didn't have any more money to buy more. And if openly talking about a case that you're currently fighting isn't bad enough, he would also violate the terms of his house arrest by trying to cut his ankle monitor off and fleeing his parents' house, which you're definitely not allowed to do, and because of that, he had his house arrest revoked and would have to wait out the rest of his days in county jail until he ended up going to trial. And for the next couple months, nobody would really hear much from Jay Jaydes, with many people assuming that once he ended up going to trial, he was going to be completely cooked and probably would have to go away for at least 4 years. However, everybody would be absolutely blown away in October 2025 when it was revealed that his case was actually dropped because the court saw him as mentally unfit to stand trial, with him changing his verdict from not guilty to no contest, which basically means that you're willing to take the punishment for committing the crime without actually admitting to doing said crime. And with all of that said and done, he would walk free on October 20th of 2025 with 5 years probation and mandatory mental health check-ins. Once again, not really all that bad. And at this point, it kind of seems like he got away with all of it. I mean, he got time served, he never had to go to actual prison and would only have to spend his time in the county jail, which definitely isn't a great place to be, but it's definitely a lot better than actual prison, especially when you keep in mind the actual charge that Jaydes had. I don't think the people in there would have taken very kindly to him if the court had sent him there. So you would think with all of this good fortune, he would no longer want to get in trouble and would keep a clean nose for the following 5 years as to not get sent back to jail or possibly to prison. But it seems like Jaydes isn't very familiar with how precarious his situation truly is, because on November 11th, almost a full year after he got picked up by the police in 2024, he would once again wander away from the mental health facility, once again violating his probation. So at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, they're gonna throw the book at the kid. He's not learning his lesson. He doesn't seem to appreciate the fact that he was able to get off without much punishment. But no, he ended up going to court. They said, hey, it was an accident. And once again, he was allowed to return to the mental health facility. And for those of you who are thinking that he's getting a worse punishment by being in a ward, he's not in some full-time 24-hour ward. He's basically in a very light security mental health facility, which is why he was able to wander away in the first place, meaning he only has to go there in the daytime and is allowed to return to his parents' house at night. So really, the only punishment that he has is that he's not allowed to move around as he would like to, and he's probably not allowed to make music. But overall, he pretty well got away with a slap on the wrist, which has left fans pretty conflicted on how to feel, because on one hand, he's clearly dealing with a pretty bad mental issue, which the courts of course have to help him get through, but on the other, he committed a violent act and probably should get punished for it. I mean, being seen as mentally unfit to stand trial is a pretty hard thing to get. I mean, that's usually what they try to get for serial killers, but it never really works, because it basically means that you don't stand trial because you're not aware that what you were doing was actually bad. You don't have a concept of right and wrong, and you're not aware of the actions that you were taking at the time, so you can't be tried for it. It's kind of a weird loophole that people use, but it worked for Jaydes, and well, here we are. And you're probably thinking, is this guy going to continue to have a career? I mean, after all, after doing all of that shit, people are probably not going to want to fuck with his music anymore, but come on guys, we're talking about hip-hop here. People only want to fuck with his music more ever since he got out of prison. Now, will his parents let him make that music? It's kind of hard to say. I feel like he's probably not in the right place to be able to actually record music, but if he did put something out, unreleased or not, I'm sure plenty of people would go give it a listen, with half of them doing it out of sick fascination and the other half doing it because, well, they support him. Although, I am going to say one thing here, and you can believe it or not, but if you truly believe that Jaydes is innocent and that he didn't stab the girl, why did he go to Denny's and then attempt to stab somebody else? It kind of shows a repeated behavior, don't you think? I mean, if the girl really lied about the entire situation to try to take him down, was Denny's in on it too? Did she call Denny's before the fact and told them to make up some bullshit lie? Come on guys, I mean, he probably did what he was accused of, but hey, you know, allegedly. But with all of that said, I guess the one bit of cosmic justice that he actually got is that David ended up doing something very similar and more severe a couple months after Jaydes, basically taking his whole cool serial killer rapper persona away and basically overshadowing him because he's a lot bigger of an artist. So yeah, I guess that's something, but really not much of anything. And with that said, if you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to like it, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. And if you guys want to see me do a video on David as well, definitely let me know. I know it's been overcovered to hell and back, but if you guys want to hear my voice on it, then well, I can do that. If not, well, we'll continue to work our way through this new underground scene. And with all that said, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.